flash of lightning illuminates the landscape as far as you can see for a tantalizing split second, and you catch a glimpse of a big black mass in the middle of the road, far away. Dark returns just as quickly, and the scene is temporarily emblazoned on your retina. What was that? It's too far away to tell, but it's really not far enough away for comfort. You keep staring with eyes wide, hoping to use any future bursts of light to discern what the mass is, but the storm does not oblige. So, more wary now, you turn around and you walk briskly, but you don't jog. You want to keep the noise under your feet to a minimum so you can keep your ears tuned. There's another crack of thunder and lightning at the same time, and before you have time to turn around, you hear the noise again, louder this time, continuous. Thump, clack, clack, slap, thump, clack, slap, slap. It gets louder. It gets faster. It's heading this way. Something inside of you snaps. You start running as fast as you can, eyes wide, heart pounding, arms pumping, feet vaulting over the treacherous mix of mud and rock. The noise behind you does not stop. It gets louder. It gets faster. You haul. You have never run this fast, this far. You get to the last turn you made. You're closer to your car now. It's just up the street. You keep running. The noise continues. Is it even closer now? Did it follow you after you turned? What is it? You run and run. Now you're at that low hill you remember. In the dark and the wet, this hill seems steeper. Is it the same hill? It's got to be the same hill. You slip a little bit, but you continue the fast climb. You round the top and you regain your speed, charging ahead. You can't see it yet, but your car has to be just a little distance away. The thought of getting into that steel and glass barricade is more compelling than you ever could have imagined. Suddenly, you hear the sharp sound of thumping and slapping hitting the bottom of the hill that you just climbed up. Whatever it is scrapes and clacks to the top of the hill. You panic. You run as hard as you can in the direction of your car, and the noisemaker pursues. You're running in the middle of the road, pelted by rain, surrounded by grass and trees and fences you can't see. Lightning flicks the land in front of you with light every now and then, but you're having trouble interpreting the strobe light images. You keep running. You thought you'd be at your car by now. You keep running. You plan which door you'll go to first. The author of the clacking sound is gaining ground. It's so close you can also hear a kind of throaty, snorted breathing. You should have been at your car by now. You keep running. Did you pass your car? Is it possible you didn't see it? Your feet pound, your heart pounds. The noises are all you can concentrate on. Where is your car? It can't have been this far from the hill. Are you even on the right road? Suddenly you lose your footing. You fall into a shallow puddle. You feel the pain of rocks on your legs and arms and face, and suddenly the noises and the clambering are closer and closer, and as you roll over, there's something there towering over you. You raise your arms in instinctual self-defense, straining to see what it could be. A flash of lightning, and you see, ah! What do you see? We've got some hypotheses working. All right, that's actually the end of my story. I'm not going to tell you the end. The question is, how would you explain this event to other people, assuming you survived? All right, listening to this story, you guys all heard the same words. If you found the story engaging, you were constructing your own version in your head of what was going on. There are now as many different versions of this story as there are people who have heard it and will hear it. Compared to the person right next to you, you probably pictured different landscape, you pictured different sensory input, you had a different main character in your head, a different car even. There's variation in the hypotheses of what the pursuer is and how the story will end. So we often think our own perception is totally unbiased. But our ability to interpret experiences and information and even to imagine possibilities is guided by what we're expecting. And what we're expecting depends largely upon what we've been conditioned to expect. So, as a person living in the 21st century, you might expect the main character in this story to be face-to-face with a rogue runaway horse, or another hoofed mammal which is maybe frightened by the storm or is acting territorial. I bet you can think of many other possibilities for the events in this story. But if you lived, say, in Ireland hundreds of years ago, you might be absolutely certain you'd had an encounter with the dreaded Dullahan, a headless elf who was said to ride across the landscape, holding his severed head under his arm and cracking his whip made from a human spine. Or, if you lived in Northern Europe even longer ago, you might have interpreted what you witnessed as none other than the great and terrible Odin, the wind god, storming out of the skies and onto the land, leading his wild hunt of spectral, thundering horses, hounds, and even female deities named Valkyries, dressed immodestly in this painting. You would want to stay well out of their way, as they would be grabbing damned souls, and eventually, as these myths melded with Christianity, they would even be grabbing the souls of babies that had died before they were baptized. Or, if you lived in England, you'd tell your fellow villagers that you had barely escaped the wiles of Herne the Hunter on horseback, a mysterious man with horns, whose scary antics were mentioned by Shakespeare in The Merry Wives of Windsor. And let's not forget the Death Coachman of Scotland and the Headless Horseman of our United States. He incidentally carries a jack-o'-lantern, which is another melding of all of our cultures in the U.S. So many different cultures would have preconditioned you to interpret your experiences in very different ways. Even if you learned of other possible explanations, you'd probably unknowingly be biased toward the one that you had embraced most of your life. This is called confirmation bias. People often tend to ignore evidence that would lead them away from what they already believe, and they interpret neutral or even ambiguous information in a way that artificially confirms their hypotheses and their understanding of the world. So, people who believe in Odin the wind god and have no scientific background will probably assume that thunder is the sound of his horse's hooves in the clouds. People who believe in ghosts might regularly interpret strange noises and sudden chills as spirits. People who believe in fairies may see fairy dances instead of lightning bugs. And, examples of confirmation bias and not considering alternative hypotheses are not limited to tales of the supernatural. I bet you guys can think of lots of people who engage in confirmation bias. So, and, we can all point fingers at other people, but do we participate in confirmation bias? Chances are we do. Most of the time it's relatively harmless, but it is good to have checks and balances in our biases. What has led many of us to our conclusions about the supernatural, and also to this room here today, together, is a willingness to reassess our biases when we're presented with new information. That openness has probably changed your life. How can we further encourage that kind of openness in ourselves and our fellow humans? I think that's one of the defining questions of our time. We can't forcibly shake most people out of their illogical and closely held beliefs, many of which involve the supernatural, but we can, little by little, help people in our societies open up to the possibility that there are other explanations they could explore and other ways to look at the world. Oftentimes there are natural explanations and outlooks which are far more satisfying. If you're looking for natural explanations for the history of many supernatural characters like the ones that I shared with you, Lore of the Ghost by Brian Houghton is a great, easy read, good place to start. It's a fantastic book. It's a historical and psychological exploration of where It's also good to have a discerning and skeptical attitude toward all subjective experience. But if you're ever out alone on a county road on a dark, stormy night, beware. And doesn't that just make sense anyway? Stay in the car.